Thank you so much for that intro, Jeff. Hi everyone, good evening. Well, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan Community Consultation for Kitchissippi Ward. My name is Emma. I'm one of Jeff's assistants. My pronouns are she, her. I'm still a little green at running webinars, so I really appreciate everyone's patience with me tonight. Joining us this evening from the city's Community Safety Plan team, we have Lisa, Valerie, and Leslie. They're going to be guiding us through a presentation and facilitating a discussion later on. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to go over the format for this evening. So this is a Zoom webinar. That means that your mics and cameras are turned off while the presentation is happening, which will begin shortly. I would ask you to please direct any questions you have about the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan to the Q&A box, which is on the bottom of your screen. We will be taking a moment to address these questions when the presentation is complete. And because we have slightly fewer attendees than we had anticipated, after the presentation and the question and answer period about the plan, I will be altering the settings of the webinar a little bit to allow participants to unmute themselves at will, because we're going to be having a discussion on some community engagement questions from the Community Safety Plan team. So during this period, I would just ask that everyone please be considerate towards everyone on the call, so we can make sure that everyone who wishes to speak gets the chance to. Also, if you would prefer not to speak, but you have some feedback to offer, please don't hesitate to drop that in the chat for the meeting. If you have more feedback to provide on this plan after this event is over, please do send us an email. All the feedback you send will be forwarded to the Community Safety Plan team, as well as a log of everything from the Q&A and the chat boxes. Also, this event is currently being recorded, so it will be available to watch later on our Ward YouTube channel. And so if anyone missed the event, they can always shoot me an email. I'd be happy to send them the link. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa and her team to get us started with our presentation. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thanks, Emma, and thank you, Counselor, for hosting as well. Great opportunity for us. So I am going to try this. I always hope that the tech works. So Emma, can you see the slide? Yep, perfect, because you're the one that's at the top of my screen that I can see right now. So that's great. Thank you so much. So I really want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Lisa Petsch, and I'm the program manager for this project. So today I'm going to give you an overview of the community safety and wellbeing plan, and you're going to have an opportunity, as Emma mentioned, to ask questions. And also we're going to ask you questions for you to provide input into the plan, and you will be able to do that, as Emma mentioned, through the chat or through conversation. And the ideas that you provide today will help to develop strategies and actions for Ottawa's first community safety wellbeing plan. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. We understand that everyone is tired from the ongoing pandemic, and we also recognize that there are a lot of other consultations happening right now on many topics. So we really want to thank you for giving us your time tonight. And I want to acknowledge that I live and work in Ottawa, which is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. And I extend my respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable contributions, both past and present, to this land. And as a way to live out our commitment to reconciliation and respect, the Community Safety Wellbeing team is preparing and working with Indigenous partners on consultation specifically with Indigenous peoples to recognize their unique experience and contributions to Ottawa. Okay. So what is this Community Safety Wellbeing Plan? So the development of a local Ottawa-based Community Safety Wellbeing Plan is mandated by the province for all municipalities in Ontario. The original deadline set by the province was to have a plan created by January 1, 2021, but recognizing the challenges and some of the realities of an ongoing pandemic, the province has now set a new deadline for July 1st, 2021. An advisory committee is required under the legislation and outlines required membership, and the Crime Prevention Ottawa Board of Directors is the advisory committee for the plan, and have expanded their membership to ensure our legislative requirements are met. And the plan will address complex issues that require collaborative community solutions. And while the city plays a coordinating role to develop the plan, the activities identified in the plan will ultimately be delivered by the most appropriate agencies. And that means that actions may be undertaken by the city or may include other levels of government, community agencies, or service providers. And we recognize that there's a vast amount of work already underway by the city and community organizations to address community safety and well-being. And we want to leverage, not duplicate, this wonderful work and enhance these initiatives through enhanced multi-sector collaboration. This plan is about using existing resources and assets in a more innovative, effective, and efficient way to address gaps around community safety well-being, as well as investing where needed in Ottawa's communities. And the community safety well-being covers a very broad range of issues and means something different to every person in this room. And we want to hear your voice to ensure the plan is meaningful to the whole community. And the community safety well-being plan is tackling the most pressing issues that were identified, impacting crime, safety, and well-being specific to the Ottawa community. So the plan, in terms of the goals and our overarching pieces, the plan seeks to foster an inclusive community where everyone feels safe, secure, and supported by a robust social safety net. And the plan encourages a collaborative community approach. Local priorities have been identified as part of our plan. So Ottawa's community safety wellbeing plan will look different from other municipalities in Ontario. As mentioned, it will complement existing initiatives and look for ways to enhance current processes, address gaps, and reduce overlap. And lastly, it's going to identify strategies and actions to reduce our local risk factors and set measurable outcomes. And the plan will consider short, medium, and long-term actions. And we're looking at about a 10-year time frame for those long-term actions. So unfortunately, at this time, there's no provincial or municipal funding identified to support the implementation of action items. All work is being completed within existing budgets. And we will work to develop a financial framework with both our internal and community partners to look for innovative ways to fund the action items that are included in the final plan. So this is just to give you a sense of the plan's areas of focus. The provincial legislation requires that community safety well-being planning processes consider all 4 of these different action areas of focus. So I'll read them through and explain. And the plan will focus on, based on the direction that we've received from the community from our first round of consultations, the plan will focus on root causes of the variety of issues. So the 4 categories or areas of focus that are discussed are social development, prevention, risk intervention, and incident response. And although incident response often gets a lot of attention, the critical area of attention for us is the social development piece. This is where we believe we'll see the long-term investment to improve the social determinants of health and well-being. So this slide shows a timeline of key milestones on the journey to develop Ottawa's first community safety wellbeing plan, and the red arrow indicates where we are in the timeline. So in 2018, the Safer Ontario Act mandated that every municipality in Ontario is required to prepare and adopt a community safety wellbeing plan. Our roadmap report to Council in 2019 outlined the planning process we would undertake to develop the plan. And in 2020, we completed data analysis, environmental scans, and a first round of public and stakeholder engagement to determine the priorities for the community safety wellbeing plan. And we're currently in our second phase of public and stakeholder engagement activities to develop strategies and actions for each of the community safety wellbeing priorities. And as I mentioned, your ideas today will help shape the strategies and actions for those priorities. What we heard report summarizing all the community feedback that we've been receiving will be available in the spring of this year. And our plan is for the Ottawa's first community safety wellbeing plan to be presented to Council for consideration in June 2021. Implementation of the plan will be an ongoing collaborative community initiative and will be a fluid process that will be nimble and able to adapt to the changing community needs. So in October 2020, Council approved 6 priorities that are the focus of Ottawa's first community safety wellbeing plan. And these are the most pressing issues that Ottawa residents identified it as needing to be addressed first in our community. And I'll go through each one quickly to share with you an overview of each topic. So discrimination, marginalization, and racism means the unjust treatment of different categories of people as insignificant, especially on the grounds of race, age, sexuality, financial status, ability, or gender. The Community Safety Wellbeing Project team is working closely with the Anti-Racism Secretariat, the Women and Gender Equity Strategy, partners within the Indigenous community, and many others to move forward on this priority. Financial security and poverty reduction can be summarized as the peace of mind felt when an individual is not worried about whether their income can cover their expenses. It also means that there is enough money saved to cover emergencies and future financial goals. And this priority is connected and linked with other issues such as housing, mental well-being, and discrimination. Gender-based violence and violence against women includes violence based on gender norms and unequal power dynamics committed against someone based on their gender, gender expression, gender identity, or perceived gender. And it may take many forms, including physical, economic, sexual, as well as emotional abuse. And housing may consider accessible, equitable, and affordable housing, alternate transportation to connect housing with employment and recreation, a reduction to the housing wait list, and solutions to address homelessness, amongst others. The Community Safety Wellbeing Plan will support and enhance the important work already underway by the 10-year Housing and Homelessness Plan and other initiatives related to housing. Mental well-being. This one is a complex one because it also encompasses mental health, substance use issues, and social isolation. And this was identified as being critically important as we went through our first round of consultations to consider all three together, as they're connected and can't really be separated. And then lastly, integrated and simpler systems. So this is about working collaboratively together to create a more streamlined system. And that can include things like data sharing, communications, service delivery, policy, process, and others. And we recognize that all of these priorities are interconnected, and know that it's sometimes very difficult to talk about one without talking about the other. So as mentioned, there are a lot of different ways that you can get involved in this process. This is one way, and I know I looked at the names of some of the participants, and we've seen you at some of our other community conversations, so thank you for coming out to those as well. But if you'd like to provide additional input on the Community Safety Wellbeing Plan after today's discussion, there are many ways to share your ideas. So Emma already offered that you can send an email into her through the office, and they'll share that information with us. But we also have extended our deadline for consultation to the 5th of March, so by Friday. So if you choose to, you can also participate on any of our online activities until that date. You're welcome to send us an email or to give us a call, and we're happy to have a conversation with you as well. And our current engagement period also includes a wide range of consultations with stakeholders, agencies, service providers, and populations most impacted by the community safety wellbeing priorities. We also contracted with City for All Women Initiative, COWI, for them to host sessions on our behalf with populations that typically would not engage with the city. So I'm going to pause now to see if there's questions that have been coming in, Emma, on the Community Safety Wellbeing Plan. So I'll stop sharing just to make it easier, and then we can go back after that.
Sounds great. So we only have one question in the Q&A. So I'll read it out loud. It's a bit of a long one. Okay. Doesn't this concern for and granting authority to the city to manage or define issues of community health and safety conflict with the present powers defined in the Municipal Act of Ontario regarding public safety? This seems to be a redundancy here, which introduces legal confusion that may allow usurpation of a landowner's rights, in that the community will be empowered to trespass to enforce its mandates.
So I never really thought about that. And maybe Valerie, I'm going to get you to jump in on this one because you know the Municipal Act much better than I do. So I'll let you answer that one, and maybe I can add to your response if needed.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Emma. No, I don't believe that there is a conflict. As Lisa explained, there was a specific amendment that was made to the Police Services Act in 2018 that mandates that municipalities such as the City of Ottawa have to develop and adopt a community safety and well-being plan. The priorities that councils choose to focus on in those plans are local. It will be up to council. As Lisa has explained, our council has already chosen the priorities. We're now developing the rest of the plan for council to consider later this year. There is nothing that we will propose in the plan that conflicts with a property owner's rights under the Trespass to Property Act. And in fact, the authority to develop this plan, the mandate to develop this plan, is completely separate from the Municipal Act. I hope that answers the question, but if not, I'm happy to elaborate.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Jeff, I see you had your hand raised.
I do. I have a question.
Yes.
What is the feedback that is most helpful? And I don't know if that will become clearer as the evening goes on, but what are you consulting on at this point?
Yeah, so for this one, what we're really looking at is trying to narrow down even further from what it is that we heard from our first round of consultations around those priorities. So our first round of consultations was really around, we had a much broader list of topics. There were over 20 topics, and it was trying to narrow down to say, out of those, what can we focus on? Because we can't do everything. As much as we might want to, we can't do everything. And now it's about really looking at and saying, what are the most important things? It's helping to further define and narrow those pieces down to say, if we really look at these, what are the things that are most important within these also very broad topics? What are the things that are most important that people really think need to, and what are their ideas for how we can actually address those and really look at them? So the questions that we're actually going to get into are around those priorities. What are people looking at and seeing as their biggest challenges or barriers that they're facing in the community that they around these topics that need to be addressed? And then from their standpoint, what strategies and actions do they think that we should be taking? And we're taking all that information and bringing it together to be able to pull information together and then look at saying, okay, these are the priorities, and setting strategic objectives for each one of these priorities, and then setting, here are the actions that we think will actually help us meet that. So that's where we're at. It's a constant, I refer to it as the funnel. We started really big, and now we're narrowing and getting closer down so that we're focused on, here are concrete actions that we can actually take to move forward, to actually move the needle on these issues and looking at and addressing them in the longer term. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. That's helpful. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. So we actually don't have any more questions in the Q&A. If anyone does have a question about the plan, now is your chance. So please drop that in the Q&A. But of course, at this point, I think we're planning on moving on to our questions for the attendees.
So Emma, maybe I'll jump in and just answer a question that's a common question that tends to pop up later for people. And so I might as well head it off now. So I've had a lot of questions around, how are we, what kinds of groups are we reaching out to? Are we getting to, older adults, youth, Indigenous peoples? How are we getting into those different communities? And so we have multiple ways that we're actually trying to do that. So you're actually, this is our second consultation today. We had another big one this afternoon. So we've been doing that. And I think this will be number 4 this week for us in terms of all of the consultations. So we've done some community conversations where anybody could sign up who wanted to participate. We had no control around that. We do have a survey, and we're keeping track of who's being there. So we've been monitoring how our participation has been on that in terms of the demographic side. But then we've done specific outreach with specific communities, and we've worked with our community partners to try and identify the different groups that we could access into. And then Cowie is also helping us with that in terms of reaching out to communities that wouldn't typically engage with the city and go from there. So we're trying a whole bunch of different ways to actually do that. And we're working with agencies who typically work with those types of those populations or those demographics so that we can actually access into those mix as well. And I love that your cat has joined us for this
I know,
conversation.
She's really, she loves to participate. Yes,
we actually, in one of our consultations, heard about the importance of pets as being something that's really important for a lot of people's mental well-being. So, hey, it's just a great example of that. So,
yes.
So I'll just head off. I like to answer that question for people because it inevitably at some point comes up in the conversation. And as I mentioned at the beginning, when I was talking about our commitment with our Indigenous community and the Indigenous population living here in Ottawa and surrounding areas, we are doing a specific consultation with Indigenous partners with Indigenous peoples that's culturally sensitive and appropriate, and in the fashion that they would like to do that. So that is something that we're also undertaking as a separate process for that too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that information. It's really great to hear, how kind of wide-reaching these consultations have been.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no further questions in the Q&A about the plan. So what I'm going to be doing now, we do have a question in the chat. I will read it out to the panelists. So this question reads, is the plan for all of Ottawa, or could the plans be ward specific? For example, Westboro has different priorities than Alta Vista.
Yeah, so the plan itself is meant to be a citywide plan that we're looking at because it's really trying to look at the root causes of some of those broad social issues, while actions might be tailored to different populations or areas or those pieces. The actual kind of plan itself is a broad, full of Ottawa plan.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
Jeff, I see that your hand is raised. Do you have a question?
Just in terms of questions, etc., are people able to just raise their hand using the raise hand function if they just want to ask their question out loud as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was about to jump into an explanation about that for our moving on to our discussion period. So as we move on to the discussion period, we do have at the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says raise hand. It's got a little icon with a hand. So if you would like to speak or you have a question or a comment, you are definitely welcome to press the button to raise your hand. However, because we do have only 16 attendees on the call tonight, what I am about to do is upgrade everyone to panelist, which means that everyone will be able to turn their mics on and off at will. So I mentioned that earlier in the evening. So while we're doing that, just another reminder to folks to please try to, not talk over each other and be respectful of that. If you are, concerned about not wanting to interrupt people, you will still be able to use the raise hand function. So if you'd like to say something and you don't want to be interrupting, feel free to raise your hand. I'll make note of it and I'll call on people as I see their hands raised if that's what folks would prefer to do. But in the meantime, I am going to get busy promoting everyone to panelist. And just a reminder, when you're not speaking, to please remember to keep your mic muted, and I'll let Lisa start screen sharing for our questions that we have for the community.
Great. So that's what I'll do. I'm going to do that and I'll introduce the questions as you're promoting everybody up to do that. So Leslie, I can see you now. So can you let me know if you can see that? Okay, perfect. So our two questions that we're asking tonight are, when thinking of the 6 community safety well-being priorities, what challenges and barriers are there in your community that residents face related to these 6 priorities? And then what actions can we take at the city or in the community to address the barriers? And we want to hear all your ideas about what actions could be or should be considered for the community safety well-being plan. So please feel free to share your answers. As Emma mentioned, you're going to be up there, you can speak, but if you're not comfortable with that, feel free to put them in the chat. We are capturing that as well. And just so you know, no names are being captured. So it won't be one of those things where we're going to be saying, so-and-so said X when we're actually reporting back. That's not what we're doing. We're really trying to get all of those ideas and bring them together. So let's get started. I'm really excited to hear your comments. And I know Leslie was going to post these questions in the chat as well, so that I can stop sharing and so we can all see each other a little bit better as we're actually doing this.
They're in the chat now, Lisa, as well as the priorities to remind everyone in case you've forgotten what they are.
Perfect. Great. Thanks. So I'm going to start with the first question again. And I'm going to do this a little bit differently than we've been doing some of our other questions, because I find sometimes it's hard for people separate the two. Often people talk about a challenge and have have an action that they want to talk about at the same time to provide that context. So we will kind of look at doing the two questions at the same time, in the sense that what challenges and barriers are there. So if you want to focus on that question and you don't have an action, or you're just saying this is the barrier and I think we need to do something about it, and you don't have an idea of how we can, you can share that. Or alternatively as well, if you have an action, but you don't necessarily have it directly tied to some specific barrier, that's fine. Feel free to jump in with either. And I also, if we get really going with the conversation with those ones, or if the conversation slows down, I can throw in a couple of other ideas just to help people get going and get them thinking about how they might think about this differently. So does any brave soul want to go first and provide their ideas around any either barriers or any actions that you think the city should be taking or related to, or the community should be taking around these 6 priorities?
I'm brave.
Oh, great. So Karen, I think it is, right? Great. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm Karen from the Parkdale Food Center, and I can't. Hi, Jeff. I'd like to see you in that room with the thing, the kids thing. I can't actually see the questions in the chat, but I really, I wish we had been involved in this before. And when you talk about agencies, so we run the Ottawa Community Food Partnership, and we would really like to be involved in this. So that's 9 agencies across the city. So barriers, well, the number one barrier, and I can't see how the city can help with this, is of course income. So that is the number one barrier that can solve many, many of these problems. And so as long as the city has 370 families living in shelters, which we can say many of them are motel rooms, and they're staying there 2 years upwards, over 2 years, some of them, in inappropriate housing. And I know you've been just discussing all of this at at council, Jeff, which is shocking. And so then the other priorities, so now we're talking about housing, but then I notice you don't have food security, but I'm sure that's in poverty reduction. And so if you're in one of those motel rooms, Jeff and I had a little sneaky visit to a motel room a year ago, just before this pandemic happened. And what we witnessed brought a tear to both our eyes, both of us, because there's no place for people to cook. And so now you imagine people for 2 years in motel rooms with their children. So now you have 3 and 4 children living in motel rooms, many without even windows that open or don't even go to the outdoors. And now we're talking about mental illness. Because not only are the parents then experiencing mental illness, but the children are. Imagine you're a 15-year-old boy sleeping with your 12-year-old sister in the same motel room for 2 years. And so not to mention the guys that are out in front trying to get these young teenage girls and selling drugs and, from the back and all of that. So those are the type of things that we are faced with. Every day. And I don't see any real move or anything that's happening or that's changed at all. And I don't know that a community safety and well-being plan, because you just said that there wasn't any money behind this. There was no funding behind it. So I hate for the first comment to be negative, but I can tell you right now, you could be addressing a lot of those priorities just by finding those 370 people, families, homes, and giving them enough income to live. So everybody else on this call, it's $3,000 plus a month per room. And so if we're giving a family 2 rooms, and many families have 2 rooms, right, Jeff? That's $6,000 plus a month for a family to not even be able to cook. So you know, that is my number one. And then on the other end, it's the poor, the people making $733 a month that are, maybe that are living in rooming houses in appalling conditions. And I know there's a new rental accommodation safety plan taking effect at the end of Valerie, I just saw you on the Somerset West Community Health Center meeting, advocacy meeting. So that's taking effect at the end of August, beginning of September. But we just heard that there isn't money for photocopying, and it's mostly going to be online. And of course, a lot of those people, not only do they not have phones, they don't have computers. How are we going to reach those people with that information? And so those people really suffer because nobody can live on $733 a month. So their mental health and blah, blah, blah. So those are the barriers. And so we are at Parkdale, we are working on poverty reduction and programs for poverty reduction every single day. And we run the Cooking for a Cause Ottawa program, which is keeping businesses working, 18 businesses currently, and we're providing food for two of the respite centers too. But so those are the solution part of it. And the city is helping with that. And we do provide crock pots for anybody, any family living in a motel. And thank you very much to Jeff Leeper, because if it wasn't for him, many of those motel owners were refusing the use of slow cookers in their motels. Right. And it was Jeff and Catherine McKinney who stepped up and said, that's not okay. So
I heard a number of things in there, and I think you were moving into some things around, income and income levels and those pieces. You talked about, housing, and particularly a number of the challenges, particularly around families living in motels, hotels, those pieces where they don't have that. You talked about food security as well, and we do consider food security in as part of that poverty reduction. We hear about food security quite a bit as we've been having our consultations and discussions. You also talked about the mental well-being that actually goes along with all of those pieces when you're dealing with all of those. So I heard about those things. You also talked about some programs that are already existing that perhaps could be expanded, enhanced. I may be putting words in your mouth there, but you were talking about how they're successful. So the Cooking for a Cause, your Crockpot programs, a number of different programs that you have in terms of supplying food. And I know it's good, healthy food as well, which is also, an important part of those pieces. So thank you for all of those ideas in terms of the different pieces that are going from there. And happy to connect with you some more, Karen, around the Ottawa Community Food Partnership and what's happening in terms of those pieces. We're happy to do that as a separate conversation.
Yeah, so food security is not a food problem. So we just need to, all of us need to be really, we shouldn't really talk about food insecurity. It is income inequality. So it's economic inequality is the problem. And it's growing in Canada. It was growing before COVID, and now it has exploded. And so only a small percentage of people who need food, who aren't eating, come to a food bank. A food bank is an oppressive system, and we need to do everything to get away from it. We would like to, maybe you people could all help us. We would like to start a food co-op run by our neighbors and get out of the food banking business. We're working towards getting out of that business so that the low income Ottawa residents can determine their own food, the kind of food that they want to eat, and they can be in control of it, and not us.
So that sounds like another potential action as well, as around looking at food co-ops as a way to look at those pieces. So
we pitched it to the Peacoat Center in Toronto, and they, for a 5-year plan, and they almost took it. But we weren't quite ready, but we're still keen. Jeff, you're going to help us one day.
I want to hear a lot more, Karen. I am interested. Call me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so Counselor, I see you have your hand up. You put your hand up there. Was that more just to say that you want more information, or did you have a comment you wanted to add into the mix too?
No, I'm looking to add in. First off,
Okay.
thank you very much, Karen. And I know, I recognize, I think, all the names or most of the names on this evening's participant list, and you know that you can count on the support of virtually everyone who's in this room who know and love you. I wanted to maybe put one of our community members on the spot. I suspect a number of folks are here this evening because of the impact of addictions in the community and some of the contribution that addiction makes to a feeling of not being safe, and not having that sense of well-being, as well as concern for those who have addictions issues, on behalf of whom many of the people on this call are also concerned. I don't want to address that myself. I'd much rather hear from any community member who might want to get into that a bit more.
Great, thank you. Anyone want to jump in? I'm not seeing any hands up, but if there's someone who wants to speak, just go ahead and jump in. Oh, Cheryl, I see your hand up. Go ahead, and Cheryl, you'll just need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, thanks, Jeff, for that. That is an issue, certainly, and creates some fears. And I think one of the gaps that we have is just services, and who do you call and how do you help and where do you go? And it really is still just a mishmash of not knowing what to do, who to call, and how to get the help for the person. And certainly, we need far more support services like that, and that's money, and it all comes down often to money. But certainly mental health is also a big part of that whole issue, and the funding for mental health and providing those resources or having a way in. Certainly the Royal Ottawa's new access MHA site could be something that really can maybe change things. Maybe it won't. I mean, maybe there's not enough resources that they'll be able to actually provide anything, but it's a very innovative idea of a way to get in, get an appointment, talk to somebody, and try to access that help first or sooner. Then what we see happening is the mental health deteriorating to the point where it becomes a real crisis, and that's not good for anybody.
And Cheryl, you talked a bit about support services. And so can you talk to me a little bit more around the types of support services that you've seen that have been needed in the community? So, is that specifically related to kind of, addictions and mental health counseling type services, or what kinds of support services do you think are needed? It might be a range of things, and that's fine too.
Yeah, certainly a range of things, but I guess sort of from my own personal experience, this fall and winter has been trying to navigate the system when I see someone who clearly needs help, who's out in the cold, and just trying to navigate that. And none of the systems work very well. And I'm never sure that the person has received help or whether they have just gone off someplace and been really cold or not made it. So that is difficult. The calling 311, or do you call Salvation Army, or do you call Somerset West, and who actually goes? Because sometimes you can't get anyone that is going to respond or respond in a timely manner. If they respond the next day, that's not helpful. Right. And so what do you do then? And how do you monitor that? Or do you just say, well, I called 311, so that's it? And it's a very uncomfortable feeling of not being sure that someone is going to get some help, especially in the winter when it's frigging cold outside. And it's just, you know, pacing back and forth and wondering, what do I do? What should I do? It's just an awful feeling. And so I know that's a lack of resources. I know there's one Salvation Army van for the city. So they can't be everywhere at once. I get that. It's just, it feels terrible to go through that.
Yeah, so Cheryl, I'm hearing a few things. One is that, lack of resources for those types of services, in that, there's not enough of those services to be able to actually do that. I'm also hearing things around just a real disconnect about which services are the best to call for that service as well, in terms of doing that. And then you also talked about, that relates directly to that integrated and simpler systems pieces, around how are all of those systems also coordinating with one another, so that those are happening, so that really you have the different doors in to be able to get it and still get the service that you need to be able to go there. So it sounds like there's a few things that are actually going on there in terms of what you talked about. And then in addition, you talked about the support services that are actually needed to wrap around a community, so that that the services are available to people to be able to actually access. And then I'm reading also in there too about concern about people's safety, particularly in the cold weather, around not necessarily having somewhere to go and a safe space for them to go. And I'm just going to bring in here to you that I see a comment as well in the chat that says, and it's often the police who come. Yes, we hear about that as well. And then they bring the person to the hospital, and then they're often just released back into the community without necessarily the supports that go along with that. So thank you for that. Additional pieces. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, so just a week ago, I was calling about somebody. So I tried the Salvation Army, but it just went to voicemail. It didn't even get that far. So I called Somerset West, but they were in a meeting. So I kept trying Salvation Army. Then I eventually called back Somerset West and said, I'm really concerned about this person. And I don't know whether they came or whether the person just left, but the person disappeared. So, but yeah, it's just, you're pacing back and forth and trying to figure out, what do I do next and who do I call? And it's just a terrible feeling, I must say, especially when there's like a minus 25 wind chill out there.
Yeah, and I mean, you care about your community, right? So you want to be able to help people when they need it as well.
Cheryl, would it be fair to say that the concern is very much for the individuals who, those of us who are housed and warm are seeing in distress, but there is a fear that I don't want to delegitimize at all, that the effects of addiction are also having on the rest of the community?
Absolutely. And again, that fear is very real. When people are finding syringes in places, when they're finding them in their driveways, that really is upsetting for people when their kids almost pick it up. Seeing people who are distraught and you're not sure what to do, especially a woman at night. I mentioned this last night of someone who was concerned because someone approached her. It was evening, and she felt it was a halfway house and was concerned for her safety. In reality, it was a rooming house, and in all likelihood, the person had mental health issues. But that fear, I saw this on Facebook. So, that whole fear of people who are not acting as we would call normal. And there was good discussion last night about, people's comfort levels. If you have experience with different issues, you have a higher comfort level than if you've never been exposed to that before. So seeing people injecting drugs out in the open, or someone who is talking somewhat irrationally, that's close to you. So those fears are very real. And I think part of it is just us knowing our neighborhood and knowing the people in our neighborhood. But we did talk about it is important that we understand some of those differences, and that does give a bit better comfort level.
Okay. Thanks for that, Cheryl. So just another comment that came in through the chat pieces as well, just that might help you, Cheryl, with some of these pieces is there is a mental health crisis line as well, and they will send a van and assess the situation. So that's just some feedback from one of your fellow participants, and I'm trying to scroll up to see who that was from, but
Karen.
and yeah, Karen, there you go. So you know, that might also be helpful for you as well, going into the future. So I'm just trying to check to see if we have any other hands up.
We do have a hand raised.
Oh, okay.
So a video, go ahead.
Great, yeah, thanks.
Oh no.
Oh, there we
Hello?
go.
There we go.
There we go.
Perfect. Great.
All right. My name is Ovidius Brisa. I'm an architect, been in Ottawa for 40 years. And boy, you guys have a big, humongous problem ahead of you. It seems unsolvable just hearing what you guys are saying. But I think there's a solution, and it's not going to be solved in a day or two or a year, 4 or 5. It's going to take years to return the city to a healthy place where people can live, all kinds of people, distressed and whatever. And we have models in Ontario of this already. That I go half of my time, I go to a small community in Southern Ontario. And the thing about that is that the neighborhood unit, and there are many neighborhoods, like for example, here in Ottawa, if you take all of Ottawa together, you probably got over, I think I had some numbers here, you probably got over 60,000 neighborhoods. And what I mean by neighborhood is an enclave of, well, a block. Every block is a neighborhood, and even has 2 neighborhoods in that block, and it even has 3 or 4 or 5. Because a neighborhood, the micro neighborhood consists just of neighbors that speak with each other on a daily basis and interact on a daily basis, on and on. Now, your counselors, each counselor, if you divide the number of neighborhoods in Ottawa by the number of counselors you have, it's humongous. It's like over, what is it, 20, I don't have the
Well,
stats.
Your numbers would be 5,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So how can you deal with that? I don't think you can deal with that by blanketing it under the directive of a community. You have to always still consider neighborhood. And if the city is going to do anything, it should encourage the strengthening of neighborhoods first. You know. Secondly, I think that throughout the 40 years that I've been here in Ottawa, I've seen traditional neighborhoods, healthy neighborhoods, being destroyed, where you don't have that like the backyard communication between people. You don't have the arguments between neighbors, because those arguments, they build better neighbors. They all come to some political consensus that and anyway, there's an amazing dynamics that happen within neighborhoods. And like the place where I go, where my wife lives, and I'm going to be moving there shortly, but it's a little town in southwestern Ontario, and the streets, they have streets and they have alleys. And the neighborhood consists of the person living on the street and on the other street too, and they're linked together by the alley, because, and then on the other side of the street is not my neighborhood. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Your neighborhood is on your side of the street, on your block, and it's also, if you have an alley, you communicate with the neighbors behind you, and you form a little social enclave, and you help each other out. And in that neighborhood where my wife lives, they have the same problems that the big city has. They have a lot of people who are not well off. They have people that have mental issues, drug problems, stuff like that. But the neighbors step in and help them. You know, it's amazing.
So what I'm so what I'm
that,
hearing from that is it's around that neighborhood and building that sense of a neighborhood of, and I'm going to use the word community, and I know that's not the word you're thinking of, but it's about building that neighborhood cohesion together around working together and being able to you know, to build together in terms of having that sense of community within your neighborhood unit, as being a key factor to helping with all of these other pieces as
That's
well.
right. And
Yeah.
as an and as an architect, I can tell you, I'm very, very upset with what's happened to Hindenburg, because Hindenburg was a place that, you know, a humble family can live very well. They had their backyards, their front yard, backyard, whatever. And there were a lot of, when I moved in there 40 years ago, I was just amazed to hear the voice of children playing, you know. You don't get that now anymore. And those backyards are gone because of this intensification that's taking place. You know, so planning strategies have a lot to do to destroying the essence and the beauty and the health of our old neighborhoods. And they're vital, you know, especially for people that are coming overseas. Usually, you know, like when we came from Italy, we were immigrants. And so we ended up living in the cheapest places in town, right? You don't have that now. No. And so anyway, that's another story altogether. But you have this is a humongous mountain you guys are trying to climb. I respect that, because I'm not liberal, I'm not conservative, I'm not MVP. I'm a socialist in the true sense of socialism. I like to socialize with people, you know, and there are a lot of us out there like that. You guys are all like that too. You have a socialist heart in you. But I think that the strategy is it's got to be a long-term strategy to say, how can we make our city healthy again, our neighborhoods healthy again? And you have to relate that to the planners that, hey, no, don't, I was shocked to hear what they're doing to Alta Vista, or they want to do to Alta Vista, you know? They're doing the same thing they did in Hindenburg. And not good, not good.
Yeah. So I'm hearing here in terms of what you're saying is the connection also between that social aspect of life and then the hard infrastructure in terms of what kinds of things we build and how we plan our neighborhoods in terms of looking at those pieces and how to make that connection.
Yeah, because getting back to socialism, social means we all have a heart as individuals, okay? And if we have a chance to express that heart, we do. And so when we see people that are a bit less off than us, we lend a hand. It's natural. It's a natural instinct.
Right.
And so the old neighborhoods allowed that to happen. The new neighborhoods are not doing that. People are building these little ivory towers for themselves, and they only go in there and that's it. They don't have any communication like an alley, a backyard, a front yard, a porch, you know, all things that made neighborhood in the old days.
A way to get together and to be able to have those, a place to be able to have those conversations isn't available.
Yeah. And I think that's not, the city can't provide that. It has to come from the people themselves. You know, that's what's going to be a long-term plan.
Right. Great. Thank you. Okay, I see. Counselor, go ahead. You got your hand up. You can feel free to jump in here. I love that you keep using the raise hand feature, though. I love that. That's great.
You got a model respectful discussion, eh?
Yeah.
So one of the things that there are two things, I guess, that I would raise, and I don't know if people want to riff off them. The first of them is one of the safety issues that I hear about a lot in the community as counselor is theft. Things that we normally think about as being police issues. People feel violated when their cars are broken into, certainly even more so when their homes are broken into. So that's one. I don't know if folks want to jump in on that, and then this and how you're treating that at the within the team. And then the second thing that I'm wondering about is something that Ovidio's comments raised for me is emergencies. Things like the pandemic Things like the blackout that we had in Ward for 2 days a few years ago, where people don't know where to turn for help. Some of the neighborhood bonds are not as strong in some things. I don't know can you talk to me about how we might see those two things, theft and emergencies, in the plan?
Yeah, so the emergencies one is what I'm going to take first because it's the easier one to talk about it in terms of those pieces. So I will disclose that I live in rural West End, so I had to help with flood response. I had friends who were facing the fact that they were looking to be flooded, and then the tornado ripped through a neighborhood and then fled again. So certainly know that in terms of those pieces. And people often think in rural areas, everybody comes together and everybody knows everybody. That isn't necessarily the case. And so that's one thing that, we have heard about around how do we do that and build and create a situation where you have the supports that you need. Because one of the things that are coming out of those emergencies that we've kind of seen, or that I've been observing as I volunteer in my own community, is around some of the real mental health and trauma pieces that have come along with living through those experiences, and the fear that comes even when the wind picks up a little bit and you hear the trees starting to move, and what does that mean and what's happening, and looking at those, are we looking at another severe weather event of some kind on top of that? And I lived through the ice storm all those many years ago, and my parents were without power for 21 days. So, it's a long time. So it's one for me that I certainly understand and see it in fitting in a few different areas. And certainly we've heard about healthy neighborhoods and neighborhood connection as being really important for a whole bunch of things. So it helps with definitely in the mental well-being side and those pieces. It also helps to create better understanding in terms of how are we fostering and understanding to try and break down some of the barriers that we see that are tied with discrimination and racism and sexism and all of those other pieces that we talk about, and how do we actually look at. So I think there are some of those factors around how do we do that to build that network and to have that cohesion in a community to be able to reach out for the resources that they need when they're needed. And I also see that tied in with the integrated and simpler systems. We're hearing about that quite a bit around how do all of these systems work together. And I hate to kind of say it, but I've been trying to find the silver linings in the pandemic. And one of the silver linings kind of coming out of the pandemic, I think, is around how some of our communities are working together and working together differently. And they're working really well differently in some of these things. So how do we build on that success and actually look at how to do that? And how do we take the lessons learned from some of these crisis type situations where we can actually bring them forward and put them into a non-crisis situation and still make them work as effectively and still feel that same urgency for that individual in terms of who might be in crisis at that point in time and needs help. In terms of the theft pieces, sometimes it depends on for me, it would depend on what's kind of triggering that theft, because we hear about, so in other consultations, we've heard about theft tied to what people believe are tied to addictions and mental health type issues, where people are breaking in to try and get pieces to be able to purchase their drugs or those pieces. So we sometimes hear about those kinds of pieces and how does that actually play into the mix? And how does that actually work and tie into those pieces, and how do we make that kind of connection and look at those? Some of that's tied to what are the services available. So we've heard about things like safe supply, and how do we actually look at those as being kind of maybe a way to address that in terms of looking at action. We also have heard about people and that fear factor that comes along, or that violation feeling that happens when people have been, and really not having great support for people when they have been a victim of a theft, and how to actually do that, because it can be not just detrimental to the person, but to community. Because as people start to hear about this, then their fear factor goes up as well in terms of how to do that. And again, that ties to me around some of those pieces that we're talking about around that neighborhood cohesion pieces. And that comes up, frankly, under all of our priorities a little bit. And how do we do that? And how do we actually address those? And that different strategies in my mind, and my background's in criminology, so it's one that I kind of tap into every once in a while, is that it would really depend, to me, it would depend on what is going on there, and we need different strategies. It's not a, you know, to the point of someone else that said this, and I think everybody said it, like, one solution won't actually work for every situation. We need to have some flexibility into that, but be able to give people the resources that they need to be able to create that sense of safety in their, you know, in their home or in their neighborhood, or wherever it may be again. And we hear that for other types of crimes as well, as being, how do we actually do that? And there are some ways to do that. There are some strategies that are there. So that's something that we can take back and we can take a look at a little bit more and do a little more research as well to say how is it that we can actually look at addressing some of those things. So I hope that answered the questions, but happy for anybody else's ideas too, if you have ideas in terms of ways, but those are some of the things we've already heard in some of our own kind of things that we've seen from other municipalities, other communities, those things that are working in terms of addressing some of those pieces.
Yeah, it's frustrating as counselor for issues of I hate the term petty theft, because it's not, right. You hear from people the distress that it causes them, and you know, I kind of come down to one of two responses. People are asking for more police, which contributes in our community to a feeling of unsafety on the part of many. Or you know, solutions that are extremely long to try to get to, which is to address poverty and addictions issues at their root with solutions like safe supply, for instance. And I was hoping to hear that there is a magic bullet that we can implement sometime before the end of Q3.
Yeah, I wish I could give you that, counselor. And as has someone who's studied these things for years, I mean, that's what my education background is, and done some research. There is no one magic bullet for any of these types of issues. It's about a collective and deliberate action to moving things to address and move the needle on these issues, to being able to do that. And there are things in the short, medium, and long term that can be done for sure, but they have to work in cohesion, and they have to be consistent and deliberate in their action to be able to actually have the impact. And I think, you know, I've heard in other cases where people are talking in some of our other consultations, we've really heard about the need for our investment in our social services to be able to provide the support that are actually needed for people who are not even necessarily just in crisis, but need support. And to be able to move forward. And so that's really important. So I just want to stop, because I think you and I could probably go back and forth on this for quite a while. And we can take that opportunity at another time. But I see Ovidio has his hand up again. So and he's had it up for a little while. So I want to be able to give him the opportunity to speak again. And Ovidio, you just have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There we go.
Lisa and Jeff. Yes, the thing about petty theft or theft, that's a thing I'm very familiar with. The last couple of years, I got hit about 4 times. But hey, you know, these are hard times. I was at the beer store on Scott Street last month, and I was being serviced by the cashier, and the cashier saw this guy walking away, running away with 2 cases of beer. He jumped over the counter, chased him for about 30, 40 feet, and floored him on the ground. And he took 1 case back. And I'm looking at him, and I'm smiling because, you know, this guy he was a young lad. And I said, how come you only took 1 case back? He says, these are hard times. So that was a socialist instinct in him, that, you know, he could have taken that guy and reported him to the police or whatever, right? That brings in another example. Wellington Street was always, you know, they have their association. It's all for the merchants. And I've said some bad things about the merchants in the past, but I didn't mean to be, you know, too bad. But the things about the merchants is that they are there from 9 to 5 and then they leave that neighborhood. They're not part of the neighborhood. So if Cheryl Perro had a problem with Cheryl, we talked about the food bank.
Karen
No.
talked about the food bank. Yeah.
Karen, okay. There should be
Yep.
no reason why our local food bank goes empty. All it takes is the neighborhood to respond to it. More so even, all the restaurants that we have on Wellington Street, do they contribute to the food bank? I don't know, maybe that could be answered, but I doubt it. And I lived in Milan many years ago, and underneath our apartment building, there was a restaurant there. And in the courtyard of that building, all these poor people, let's say, or street people, or marginalized people would come around after lunch, and the chefs would bring out food for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was happening all over Milan. You know, that's the socialist Italian attitude, you know. So there's ways, if citizens get, how do you say, modify their attitude or change or have a heart, they will do that. Like this Christmas in my little town in Southern Ontario, there's a famous French restaurant with cordon bleu chef, 6-star restaurant. And what he did, he put an ad in the local paper, the village paper, that the food bank in Chatham, Ontario was empty.
Mm.
Well, all the citizens of, okay, I'll mention it, Comber. All the citizens of Comber got together and they filled 2 18-wheelers with food that they delivered to Chatham. You see, the
Yep.
spirit is there.
Yeah.
How can we bring that spirit to the big cities?
Yeah, people can be very generous, right, in terms of
Yeah.
providing those things. I think Karen would like to jump in. She's had her hand up for a while, so I'm going to let her jump in because I think she can, speak more to some of those pieces, and I think she had some thoughts to add herself. So, Karen, feel free to go ahead.
I was just going to add maybe something positive.
Okay, go ahead. We like those. We love those as well.
So from a solution standpoint,
Yeah.
So Parkdale Food Center moved as a simple food bank, which I don't really believe in food banking, to partner to co-locate with Somerset West Community Health Center 6 and a bit years ago to test this idea of food being medicine. And we started a social enterprise with low-income youth. We just graduated our 8th cohort. We started Growing Futures. We run social justice workshops in schools and for adults. We're happy to come and run them at the city, run them for your team. And so how do we help people to understand? We believe that if we teach children and help children to understand about social justice, they then will influence their parents to understand that it's more than just giving a can of food, that people in fact need income and they need the dignity that goes along with self-determination. But at the same time, what we really created is the same thing the gentleman before me was talking about, that our vision for the future is to create healthier neighbors and neighborhoods. Right. And so our Cooking for a Cause isn't about getting a big kitchen and creating big vats of food and putting out as much as we can. It's about paying those small businesses a minimal amount of money, like, they're not making as much as they would if they were selling you a meal, and they're bringing back their staff and they're making food for social services to distribute. So our philosophy has been an open door philosophy around bringing people in. And I think, Jeff can attest to this. So all of our neighbors, where we don't call people clients, so the guys living in rooming houses, the people, the families living homeless, people are coming from across the city. with prescriptions for good food so that they can come out of their catchment areas and get food from us. And we have 2 chefs on staff. And what would happen then if we think of food as medicine, as one of the social determinants of health, and also we offer people jobs and training, and we accept community service hours from kids as young as 12 doing, and we don't ask them for, I don't care what they did. Like, I just want to give them an opportunity, and we start welcoming people in and caring about them, and they become part of, like the gentleman before said, a neighborhood.
Right.
And a sense of a feeling. Will they do better? And they need something. They need boots. They're moving in a new house. They need a microwave. They need a chair. They need a whatever. And they will help. So, for example, Gareth Davies, who owns Maker House, he just bought $9,000 worth of winter clothing and sleeping bags for $3,000. And he called me up and said, Karen, should I buy this? I'm going to, if you need it, I'll buy it right now. And I said, yeah, I need it. So he bought it. He brings it all over to us. We keep some of it. We buy a rack, we put it up, and we keep it at the front door because we can't do things like normal. And then we put it in our van and we drive it around to the safe consumption sites at Sandy Hill, at Somerset West, and to the 2 respite centers. And then we bought $1,500 worth of warm socks. Ourselves. We were food, Parkdale food, because people are outside and they need wool socks. And so, right. And so how do we show people we care about them? And will they do better if you care about them? Yeah. Like if I say, oh, Lisa, you look so nice today. How are you? How do you feel? You feel good, right? Yeah. So we have to start being good neighbors. Stop calling people clients and giving them the leftover crap. We hired 2 good chefs. One of our chefs came from Edgar, and she left her job at Edgar to come and work for us. Start being nice. Stop making Muslim women go into the basements of churches to get somebody, a Christian woman, to hand them food, or a trans person. It's oppressive. It's not respectful, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so.
Okay, it sounds like a great initiative. It sounds like a great initiative, Karen, in terms of the work that you're doing there, in terms of all of those different elements that you talked about, and around giving people dignity and being able to, really give opportunity for people where they might not have had it. So it sounds like a really great initiative that hopefully will spur off, and we can maybe encourage it a bit at our ends as well to grow in the community, so that there's a whole bunch of those that are happening across different communities.
So I was bringing, before this all happened, I was on a mission to bring all the city councilors for lunch. And so I was making my way through them, because once you see what it's like to come on a Wednesday cooking workshop and have lunch with our neighbors, and they're serving you and they're showing their place, like it's their home, you can't help but be hooked and want this in your community. Right. Which is why we started the Ottawa Community Food Partnership. How do we help other people to do this in their community? It's not just about us, right? It's about, although we'd like to get Jeff to eat more vegetables, that would be my hope. Right?
Wouldn't we all?
Okay. Thanks for that, Karen. Really appreciate it. So, Councillor, I see you've got your hand up again, which usually means that you're ready to spur some other conversation as well. So happy for you to do that too.
Yeah. So more vegetables would diminish my sense of well-being. I'll just say that.
Vegetables are the best.
I can't do it. So one of the other things that constituents frequently raise with me that is the source of not feeling a sense of safety in their neighborhoods is traffic. Okay. And I don't know where that fits in the plan. But people are, they're afraid of being hit by cars is probably the easiest way to put that. How does that fit in with what you're doing? Or have you sort of hived that off to the road safety action plan, which, we had a significant discussion about today at Transportation Committee?
Yeah, so we did, Councillor. It was one of the ones as part of our initial priorities that we were looking at in terms of one of the 20 different priorities that we were looking at in terms of a potential, and it didn't even bubble up in terms of our top 10 in terms of the issues. People were really focused on other issues, and that may be because of some of the other work that's already happening. So it didn't come up in terms of looking at this plan. What we do is whenever we hear those things, though, we do share it with any of the partners that are working in those areas. We keep our eye on it in terms of, is this an issue that's becoming a bigger issue than it was before? So is something changing in the community that we need to look at? So we keep our eye on those things in terms of doing it. But it does come up in different ways. So we have heard tied to being able to access things like recreation programs, and look at some of those pieces, particularly tied to people seeing it being really important, particularly through the pandemic, to be able to get out of the house and for everybody's mental well-being to get out and be recreation, and then traffic. And, we hear about the multi-use pathways and the conflicts even between pedestrians versus cyclists versus, and then you add in roads and cars and those pieces. So we do hear some of those around some of those issues. We've also been working with the official plan folks and the plan and planning around some of the work that they're doing, and sharing in terms of 15-minute neighborhood and the also around transportation master plan and all of those pieces. We're connecting in with those. So any information that we get, we share with them and are trying to influence some of the work that's happening there as well, so that we're all aligning in terms of what it is that we're doing. Because the basic principles behind community safety and well-being, when you think of it in its principles, it's important that those things are there. So we're not going to address it directly in the community safety well-being plan, but we always take that information. It's not that it gets lost. We make sure that we talk to our partners around people who are doing work in those areas and share that information. So all of the stuff that we got from our first round of consultations, we have shared and are staying in touch with those different. And we did hear about traffic. I know we met with you as well, and we heard about traffic. It just didn't end up coming up as high as some of the other issues.
Yeah, and I do tend to think that council is very well aware of the issues around traffic, and we're doing what we can to try to address those, independent of the SWB.
Mm-hmm.
There's I think we can wrap this up around 8 o'clock tonight, unless folks have other issues that they wanted to bring to the table. I did want to raise something which we haven't talked a lot about, which is the racism issue, where I'm not sure how many folks who are Black, Indigenous, persons of color, otherwise racialized, on the call there are this evening, but I do hear from constituents who feel unsafe as a result of ongoing hate incidents. Our ward has seen, graffiti issues. The Abdi death weighs on the minds of many. How do you see that playing out, and what sort of actions are coming up in the course of your consultations?
Yeah, so just so you know, we are jointly working with the Anti-Racism Secretariat and the work that they're doing around that piece. So in terms of the different actions, I think there has been a lot of calls for the city to self-reflect in terms of our own processes and policies and how we contribute into creating an environment in terms of creating a racist environment, in the sense of how do we address that, and how do we address the systemic racism even in our own systems, and looking at what we can do. So we have had that, and we've had some specific examples of that, where it says, these are processes that are that are, by the nature of the situations that certain demographics are in, unfairly kind of treat those. And we've heard that in terms of how even how we determine eligibility for different programs and services and those things. So we've heard some of those kinds of pieces. And then we are, I haven't got all the feedback yet from the Anti-Racism Secretariat around what it is that they may be covering and what might make more sense for the community safety wellbeing plan to look at. But because they're focused specifically on racism, we've really focused a lot more on some of the other forms of discrimination because they've been doing so much work in that area. And we want to complement each other. We don't want to be duplicating efforts in terms of what they're doing versus what we're doing. So I think it's going to be a stay tuned. There's a lot of ongoing conversations, but I saw that Awali had your hand up, so please feel free to jump in here. But then the hand went down, so I'm not sure if maybe it's lost.
No, sorry, I was just I didn't know if this was after the end of your statement. I think my question is better directed at the Anti-Racism Secretariat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, you can pose your question if you want. I'm happy to see if I can answer it, but if I can't, then we can connect you in with the Anti-Racism Secretariat. Yeah. Feel free to ask the question if you want.
I think that the counselor, just some of the comments that you were sharing, in my mind, I started thinking about, are these hate incidents or hate crimes, are they tracked by ward? I know that Ottawa Police tracks all of them, but if there was a concentration of incidents or hate incidents and hate crimes happening in a particular ward, then maybe that might direct some of our initiatives or strategies to address them. So I've never seen that before, but his comments kind of brought that to mind. It's an interesting.
Yeah, so here's what I do know, and I can't directly answer your question, but here's what I do know. So what I do know is that Ottawa Police does track any hate crime specifically. They've been tracking that, and they have seen that there has been an increase overall across Ottawa. I don't know what the breakdown is by neighborhood, and maybe Councillor, you do, in terms of by ward or neighborhood of those pieces. I don't know that breakdown is available, but we have overall as a city seen an increase in hate crime. Now, I always say that with a grain of caution, because that could be, is it that people are now more comfortable in terms of reporting those issues? So are these really new crimes that were happening, and so we're seeing something, or is it that people are more comfortable reporting, or there's a better mechanism for reporting? That I'm not sure about. I don't know. I can't give you enough context around those statistics, but I can tell you I have read the report through in terms of the numbers and the increase. And we have seen an increase this year, a significant increase this year from the previous year in terms of hate crimes that have been reported to the police. So there certainly is something happening there. And I know there was a particular concern amongst the Asian community around certainly an anti-Asian sentiment and hate crimes specifically directed towards the Asian community. And that has been why the city, through the Anti-Racism Secretariat, started a campaign specifically tied to what was happening around specifically targeted to Asian people. So those are a few things that I do know, but I'm happy to follow up with you and connect you in with the Anti-Racism Secretariat if you would like to get more information around those pieces and some of the work that they've been doing, because they are been doing some other work that I'm not as up to speed on in terms of those pieces. I always defer to Yusra, who's the specialist in there in that group for the information. So, but I'm happy to connect you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa, if I may, I guess just to bring a symmetry to the evening, we've covered a lot of the themes. We haven't talked about one last one, which is gender-based violence, and I'm just wondering what are you hearing from the community about that? Because it's not necessarily something that crosses my desk very often as a city councillor. I think, police tend to be more involved in those issues, which may or may not be a good thing. The theme in the CSWB so far is gender-based violence. We've called racism out by name. Is there a thought that we might talk about misogyny rather than just a narrower subset of that as a cause for concern?
Yeah, so we talk about gender-based violence and violence against women, and we use that language because that's the language that was used by the community when when that issue was actually raised. So that's why we stuck with that language. In terms of the gender-based violence and violence against women pieces, we've been hearing, we've done a lot of deliberate outreach, and they're trying to get to some of the providers that provide support to survivors of people who are, fleeing violent situations and those pieces. But we're also trying to get to survivors. As I'm sure you can appreciate, during a pandemic, it's difficult to be able to do that. But we're doing our best we can to be able to do that outreach as well, to get direct input. We hear two camps on that one. We hear about the need for the services, and we hear about the connection with housing and financial security, and even just the headaches in terms of trying to set up banking and all of those different elements that come along with that. So the basic piece is when people are trying to flee and get away from a violent situation. But then we also hear the other camp about what work do we need to do and what can be done to do the prevention pieces so that we're not getting into that situation in the first place. So how might we break a cycle of violence, and how might we prevent it at a very young age as well, in terms of working with children and youth, in terms of really looking at those pieces. And there have been some kind of neat ideas that have been coming out about ways that we can actually look at addressing some of the prevention pieces. And there are some examples of initiatives that have already been underway, like the Manifest program, and some of those. So there are some of those pieces. And then we're also doing research and looking at what some other municipalities have been doing that have been successful and innovative, particularly during these challenging pandemic times. And then the one I think program that you would know about is the safe call, where you can text and do all of those pieces. So that's another program that is looking at, because it's had great success, particularly through the pandemic. And it's about what can we learn from those experiences to be able to apply in those areas. To be fair, council decided it wasn't a priority we initially recommended because it didn't bubble up to the surface, but there was advocacy to add that priority as a key priority. And I understand the reasons why in terms of doing that. So it's one that we've been doing research as well to try and figure out, are there things that we could put in place? But I would also say 60% of our participants in our first round of consultations were women. And then, we had about 10 to 15% that self-identified as part of that LGBTQIA plus population as well. And for them, the priorities were really around, if we address the root cause issues around housing and poverty, and some of those other barriers, we probably can make a big difference in some of those other areas around gender-based violence against women as well. But it's an interesting thought around, do we need to call some of the things out, like misogyny and those pieces? So it hasn't come up, so we're happy to look at it, and maybe we can do a follow-up conversation with you to talk about how that might look and how we might be able to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if any other, I want to say thank you to everyone. I know we don't have any other hands up, although I'm happy for anybody else who'd like to add in comments or give us ideas around things that they're thinking about their community that haven't come up, and you have the opportunity to do that. I'm happy to take any of those. But in the meantime, I'm going to say thank you so much to all of you for participating tonight. I really appreciate it. We've done a lot of these, but every time we get something else from every one of these sessions, we learn something else. We get other, additional ideas and actions that people think are really important. So we really appreciate it. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And Emma very generously said, if you have any other ideas, please feel free to drop an email through the counselor's office, and she's going to share all the information with us. We're really excited to do that, but I'm going to put my one plug in that if you'd like to stay up to date in terms of what's happening with the Community Safety Wellbeing Plan, we do have an e-newsletter that you can sign up for, and I need you to sign up for it because there's permissions that you have to do for privacy reasons under our legislation that you need to sign up for it. So please, you can access that through our website to sign up for that e-subscription, and then you'll get regular updates from us in terms of what's happening. I promise you're not getting emails every week. It's, you know, it's not overwhelming. And we try to be really cautious about how many times we're doing that, because we know it can be a lot in terms of email. But it's a great way to just stay connected with us as well. And I'll just remind you too that our next steps are, we will be pulling all this information together as a What We Heard report that'll be available in the spring, and we'll make sure that it's distributed through all the various channels. So counselors will get a copy, but we'll also have it on our website available for everyone. And then our plan right now is that we will be going to committee and council in June. And we will be having follow-up conversations in between that as we develop the plan with different groups who are interested, or individuals who are interested, as we're going through, as we're looking at different actions. So stay tuned, because there will be more coming, but June is the aim, so that we can meet that provincial deadline of July 1st, 2021. And so my last thing is thank you, merci beaucoup. And it was great to be with you today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you everyone for joining us. I do see that a video has raised his hand. A video, do you have any like brief final comments that you want to deliver?
This is very, oops.
Oh no, you were unmuted. It's okay. The video's coming back. We got it.
It's all good.
A video, you just have to unmute yourself. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeff, in your newsletter, and also in the Kitchissippi Times, they should always have a banner saying "Give back to your neighborhood." Right? And you can always have little feature snippets about people or a person that did give back to its neighborhood. You know,
I like that.
You got to get the fire going. You know?
I like that. Thanks, Ovidio. And I'll just add my own thanks to Lisa and Emma, Leslie, Valerie. Thank you very much for doing this. Thanks again, Cheryl, for asking me to. And I hope that everyone enjoys a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Emma.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Have a great evening, everyone. Don't forget to email me.
Thanks, Emma. And Emma, if there is anything that you end up needing from me, or there's people who email you who want to make connections to other programs or services, please feel free just to drop me a note, and we'll make sure that we make those connections.
Of course. Thank you so much, Lisa. What a great evening. I really appreciate all your hard work.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Thanks, Emma. Very well organized. That went smoothly.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really happy with it. Yeah, I'll make sure that I collect all the feedback, and I'll send you guys a link to the recording just in case that's useful.
And I sent to you the PowerPoint if you want it, but if you're posting this video, you might not need it.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's there if you want to use it or share it with anyone.
Yeah, and even if you just want to email it to the participants just so that they have it, because they were here, we're fine with that too. So it can go out to whoever needs it.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening.
Bye.
Thanks, Emma. Bye.